Today's episode is co-presented by Columbia University's Zuckerman Brain Institute and was recorded in front of a live audience on October 4th at the Forum Theater on Columbia's campus. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including one with Nick Kroll on the topic of puberty science. Don't forget to click subscribe, and please rate the show on your favorite podcast platform.
It seems like, as a species, our default setting is to be empathic and to kind of share somebody else's pain. And there's actually evidence from modern neuroscience that when someone else is in emotional or physical pain, that the brain systems you use to understand their pain are the very same ones that would be engaged if you were feeling that pain. The thought is it gives you this vicarious sense of what it's like to be them. And I suspect a lot of that goes on in the context of folks interacting at a bar.
Where you can drink your misery away. At Flames, all go to Flaming Moe. Let's all go to Flaming. When liquor in a mug can warm you like a hug, and happiness is just a flaming Moe away.
Welcome to Sing for Science, the show where musicians and scientists talk about music and science. I'm your host, Matt White. Each week, we'll talk about a song by our guest artist and how it connects with our guest scientist's area of expertise. Today, we'll be speaking with illustrious Simpsons character, Moe Szyslak, subject of the 1991 episode and song Flaming Moe's. The lyrics to Flaming Moe's characterize Moe's Tavern as a place where Springfield's downtrodden can gather in community. Moe is portrayed by six-time Emmy-winning actor Hank Azaria, who will also be joining us to offer his unique perspective on today's topic. Dr. Kevin Ochsner is a professor and former chair of the psychology department at Columbia University, where he directs the Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience Lab. The lab's work on emotion, self-control, and person perception highlight how our brains function in social contexts. Furthermore, Dr. Ochsner's work as a social neuroscientist looks at how and why it is we are wired to be social creatures, be it inside a bar, a church basement, or otherwise. The title of this week's episode on the podcast is Happiness is Just a Flaming Moe Away: How, When, Where, and Why Neural Systems Fire in Social Contexts. Columbia University, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kevin Ochsner and Mr. Moe Szyslak.
Hey there. Look, there goes Professor Know-It-All and his long-haired friend there. How you all doing?
Moe, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Moe, were you able to hear the song that we just played?
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah, that's an old song.
Well, do you feel that it accurately sums up why patrons are drawn to your tavern?
Well, if what it's saying is they come there to get drunk and fall down, then sure.
Okay, that's fair. Now, in the decades that you've been serving and observing customers, what wisdom have you gained about the human condition?
Oh, geez. Well, look, pretty much I find everybody annoying, you know? And then they have a few and they get, they progress in stages there. Like they get tipsy, and then they get kind of fun. Then they get kind of real drunk. And then there's a phase I call vomiting. And then they find a back door right back into annoying. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay. Well, so you have your hands full on any given night. I have a Columbia University neuroscientist here who I think can add further insight to your experience and what you might see every single night. So, Kevin, as it relates to your lab's research, maybe tell us a little bit about that, why we seek connection with one another in an environment like Moe's Tavern.
In an environment like Moe's Tavern specifically?
Answer loosely.
Loosely, indeed. Well, I think we come into the world as little kids needing other people. And we start as fundamentally social creatures from the first moment. And people are always there to help meet our needs, to allay our fears, to salve our wounds. And people do that quite often in a bar context. Alcohol tends to make us sort of myopic and focus on the present moment and kind of forget the big picture. And that might help us kind of be right there in the moment, connecting with another person, where maybe you feel like you can unburden yourself and connect with them, and they can connect with you.
So
Yeah, that's what I said. Folks want to get drunk.
I mean, that's fair. And Mo, do you know anything about emotional regulation?
Sure. I have sort of two modes. Very angry and furious. And, when anybody trips one of them wires, I come at them and look, the way I say it is this. In one way or the other, you're going out, right, on my bar. I'm either throwing you out or you're passing out, one way or the other.
So, and let's talk a little bit about some of your more well-known patrons, because, what Kevin's saying is that we can sometimes help regulate one another's emotions in a social context like a bar. So is it fair to say that when in each other's company, Homer, Carl, Lenny, Barney Gumble, they provide that for one another?
Well, that's a lot of fancy words there, long hair. If by what you just said, you mean do they get drunk together, then yeah, sure. They seem to, have a time with each other until I throw them out or they pass out.
Okay. Well, Kevin, what's your perspective on that?
Well, they certainly get drunk together. But, I think one thing I might emphasize is when people are there because they're feeling down, they're in some kind of difficult moment, it seems like as a species, our default setting is to be empathic and to kind of share somebody else's pain. And there's actually evidence from modern neuroscience that when someone else is in emotional or physical pain, that the brain systems you use to understand their pain are the very same ones that would be engaged if you were feeling that pain. So it gives you this vicarious sense of what it's like to be them. And I suspect a lot of that goes on in the context of folks interacting at a bar.
If I may, I'm sorry, Professor Baldy there. But whatever, I disagree. Because when I take like a baseball bat out from behind the bar and give it to a guy in the head because he's got it coming, I don't feel his pain. I feel nothing but joy there.
Well, Mo, that's fair, but I want to offer a different perspective. Are you familiar with the work of pioneering anthropologist Margaret Mead, Mo Sizlak?
Am I familiar with the work of pioneering with the whoozy now?
Anthropologist Margaret Mead, she said that the first sign of civilization is a healed, broken femur. Because in the animal kingdom, if you break a femur, you're left behind. However, when civilized, we help one another. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are you lost me at femur. The heck is a femur?
It's a leg bone.
Well, why did you just say that then? If it's a leg bone, say it's a leg bone. That's the problem with you fancy college Poindexters. Everything means something else.
That's fair. Well, the reason why I wanted to push back on your earlier response with the bat is because I'm curious, at the end of this Flaming Moe's episode, you have an appearance of conscience and you seem motivated to offer Homer a cut of your franchise money. So how does that reconcile with what you just said about only feeling joy when you can hit someone with a baseball bat?
I don't know there, Mr. Fancy Hair, but I'm starting to feel like hitting you with a baseball bat.
Okay.
Well, what are you implying over there? That it's a surprise weird that I would be nice to one of my friends? Is that what you're saying?
I guess. I think that's what I meant.
think that's, you know something? I don't know why I'm doing this in the first place. I don't have to stand here on my own bar and be insulted. That's going to happen later when these guys come in there and get drunk. So I'm done with this. I'm out of here. You can send my check to the Tavern.
Okay. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hank Azaria.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Sorry I had to come down on you both so hard there.
I think it's what we all needed. What are your memories of making this episode, if any? I know you've done hundreds.
Yeah, it's way in the rear view. I was very young. It was the first episode where I really got to be featured in the show, so I was very excited. And, we got to, my main memory is they actually flew us to Boston to record with Aerosmith because they were the bar band in that episode. And amazingly enough, I didn't even realize how on theme this was. Steven Tyler was very recently sober then, and was sharing a lot about what that was like. And I'm like 23, 24, and I'm talking to Steven Tyler. I'm freaking out. You know, I'm like, oh my God, it's Steven Tyler. And he's sharing all with me, about oversharing. I didn't ask. Believe me, I didn't ask. So Steve, I hear you just got sober. What's that like for you? He's like, oh yeah, no more drugs, no more drinking. And I was a sex addict too. I was like, isn't that just the definition of a rock star? I thought that was the job description. But yeah, that's what mostly stands out about that episode.
Well, because I'd read that, I think they'd asked that a joke be changed from free beer to free pickled eggs.
Oh, I think you're right.
So they were like real.
Yeah, he was very all about, he was very grateful. He was really kind of full of joy and love and very happy to be alive. And I was really struck by that.
So you were not sober yet at this point?
No, I was years from discovering I even should be.
Okay.
It was amazing what a precursor to my life was going to be, that conversation.
Well, because when you and I first met, you said, if I hadn't become Moe the Bartender, I would have become Hank the Bartender.
Well, I was a bartender.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's my little joke about how if I didn't get the Simpsons, I'd probably still be one.
Yeah.
Bartender. Yeah.
So when did you get sober?
Well, not till later. I just turned 60. I got sober when I was 42, 18 years ago. I went into recovery about 7 years before that, though, for an Al-Anon, for codependence, for families and friends of addicts and alcoholics. That was my first experience because I had so much of that around me and some very close people. Mm-hmm. And then the short story is that I was such a caretaker, para-alcoholism, we call it. You take on the characteristics of the disease without actually drinking a lot. And so in that early recovery, it was all about, well, what do you like? If you're not taking care of somebody else, what would you like to do? What's, and one of the things I realized I really liked to do was drink. And so at first, I really did. And at first, it was kind of healthy for me to go and have my own good time, and then that got away from me. And 7 years later, I had a hard time stopping, and I went into AA.
So, Kevin, you kind of stand out in your field because you've done a lot of research on not just, specifically on drinking alcohol and recovery from it in social context. So if you could, please tell the audience a little bit more about that.
Sure. So the work that we do in my lab, I think that's very relevant to what Hank was talking about, is we study brain systems that are involved in triggering an initial emotional response. It could be, in the case of someone who's alcohol dependent, just seeing a beer ad or walking by a bar, or you're at a party and you see people drinking. And in clinical circles, they talk about something called cue-induced craving, where it can just trigger this quick response like, oh, I kind of want to go and do that. It doesn't necessarily have to mean you feel good about it, but it's that sense of craving. Like if you're a cigarette smoker, you can feel it in your fingers, people will describe. But then we study not just how that response gets triggered, but then how you can regulate it, how you can change and modify that response in some ways, either on your own, kind of what we call that self-regulation, or with other people. We call that social regulation, where they help you, just their presence or the things they say, the things they do help you change your emotional response in some way. And maybe most relevant to what we're talking about, we did the first brain imaging study of somebody who was a group of people who were substance dependent, they were smokers, getting their craving for cigarettes triggered and then trying to regulate it. And the cartoon version of it is shown there on the screen on I guess it's your left-hand side, where it's like parts of the evolutionarily newest and kind of biggest, unusually biggest in us, part of the brain, the frontal lobe. Parts of that are involved in like reminding yourself what's negative about smoking, the consequences of it, the reasons you have to stop. And that ends up turning off or influencing, turning down kind of evolutionarily old subcortical parts of your brain that triggered the initial craving. And that was kind of like the ship that launched 1,000 other ships. We've done subsequent work on that. People have done it in the context of alcohol, cue-induced craving for alcohol. But maybe that answers your question.
Well, so when you, like, we're looking at these regions in the brain, and is that just, they light up, you measure it with what? Increased blood flow? Is that how it works?
So if you guys have ever had an MRI scan, they put you in this big, what looks like plastic box on a bed that slides in there. If you end up with like a black and white picture of what it looks like inside your head, that's a structural image, just the structure of your brain. When we're doing this stuff, we're looking at kind of activity. So when you see a picture of alcohol, what parts of your brain are more active? And we measure blood flow. Yeah. So it's an indirect measure of the brain being active.
So can you tell us more about the right-hand image there, about social regulation?
Yeah. So social regulation is something we do all the time. You know, when we talk to friends who are having trouble, when your therapist talks to you, they're the regulator and you're the expresser of emotion. Parents do this with their kids all the time, at least up to a certain age, if they let you. And the idea is the figure on the left, the blue, is kind of using their frontal lobe to interpret and understand the person in green's emotional responses, which are kind of the brain systems that are symbolized by the little red circle, and the things they say, the things they do, even just their simple presence can end up changing the way in which that person's emotion systems respond. And this is a cartoon version of it. And then the brain regions below are also for another piece of it that's really specific to the social context. There's a whole system in the brain for understanding thoughts and feelings. Like anytime you say to yourself, oh, God, I feel like crap about that, or I feel like that person made an off-color joke and I'm so embarrassed now, and so on. Just the language, retrieving that language, it's so important to us. There's a whole system in the brain that seems to be really important for that. And like the one brain structure that's unusually big in us, Homo sapiens sapiens and every other primate, is right here, and it's part of that system, right? And it's the system we use, like kids use it to understand the first time the perspectives of other people and so on. So when you're trying to understand somebody else and help them, that brain system is really, really important.
Did you tell me when we first spoke that the size of our brains corresponds to the size of the social group that we exist within?
So there's a British anthropologist named Robin Dunbar who first put this idea forward that there's something called the social intelligence hypothesis, that the driver of us being this unusually smart and creative and flexible species that made us this crazy dominant organism on this planet was really the advantage we get by being social. Like, by working in groups, we can do so many things we can't do otherwise, and that we needed to be really smart in order to understand each other and all our emotional and social complexities, to negotiate, but I think really importantly, and sometimes it's underappreciated, to emotionally support one another is another piece of it. And so his idea was that you can chart brain size across primate species, across the size of like the largest group that you tend to be a part of. And there's this sort of linear relationship that he initially charted out between like size of your cortex, which is like the outer surface of the brain. It's like imagine you took like a piece of paper and crumpled it up, and like the little bumps, the little ridges are what you see in a brain diagram. Like the surface of your brain, the cortex just means bark in Greek. It's like one continuous sheet crumpled up to fit inside your skull.
Say that about the bark again?
The Greeks named a lot of brain structures, right? And they just named it for stuff in the world it looked like to them. And so cortex means bark.
Oh.
Because it looked like the bark of a tree to the Greeks.
So I was wondering, when we were chatting a bit backstage, I was wondering, so the evolutionary advantage, it was a huge advantage to be empathetic, relate to each other, connect with each other, emotionally and otherwise.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're trying to work together as a team to accomplish something like agriculture, early on, would that have been possible if people didn't work together in groups? Just the survival advantage. Some people draw an analogy like with early human groups, early primate groups, and just like imagine like some species of, I don't know, wildebeest or something on a savanna somewhere where you may note if you watch them, if you watch like one of these Richard Attenborough series, you'll see they're all standing there together in a group grazing, but there's always one up with their head up looking around. And everybody else gets a chance to eat while one person watches and they take turns. So there's just a simple advantage of being in a group, right? You get to eat while somebody else looks out for the predator. And so the idea is like that's built into many species from the get-go. So there's just this sense of like load sharing. Like we were talking backstage about one of the reasons it's better to probably see horror movies in a theater than at home by yourself is my daughter wants me to go take her to see the Saw movie that's coming out. So we're going to see it in the theater. It's that it's a little bit less scary, right? Like there's actually, people have done studies of this. Like you measure physiological responses and how scared people are. And it's like, the load is shared. Like you can see other people like, we're okay, right? This isn't going to happen to us.
And what was that study? People hold hands?
Oh yeah, that's another study in this domain. A fellow named Jim Cohen at the University of Virginia. He first did these studies just showing that if you're in physical pain, they can give you like a little thing on your arm that heats up. It feels like you just spilled your Starbucks on your hand and it's burning hot. You just heat this up on somebody's arm. You can show, or you can like give them a little electric shock. Yes, these things happen in psychology studies. If you're just holding the hand of your relationship partner, it's physically less painful. Other studies like Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA has done studies where you just see pictures of your relationship partner, and just seeing that can downregulate your experience of physical pain.
In the rooms of recovery, sometimes the homespun way we say it is alcoholism is a bully that I can't beat up alone, and you literally need folks. But if you're together, you can take him, the bully, and that I've definitely, whether it's codependency or drug addiction or alcoholism or food or cigarette, you name it. And yes, I've qualified for all these programs, or have at one time in my life.
Don't they say that you're not a real New Yorker until you're in multiple 12-step programs?
It was, I first went in L.A., so that shoots that theory down.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I have found it's really true. If I can just, I have a sponsee today who's sharing, the fifth step is you share, as we say it in the language of the program, is you share with God or higher power, yourself, and another human being, stuff you're sure no one would ever like you if they heard, the stuff that gives you the deepest shame, and actually just the process of sharing that. It's amazing watching people just something's lifted. You know, it certainly was true of me.
Can you talk a little bit about when you first started? We touched on this a little bit backstage. What the experience of not being able to turn to alcohol in the ways that you did, what that was like.
It was misery. You know, that one of the homespun things we say is if you want to find out why you drank, stop drinking. And all of a sudden, all these feelings that I was, you know, alcoholism is an attempt at a solution. It's not the problem itself. It's medicating, literally. And it works for quite a while for me and for most people. And then it becomes its own problem, physically and otherwise. So you have to stop. You hit some version of a bottom, which you hope isn't somebody else's death or your own or something so horrible that maybe your life can't come back from it. And you have to stop, and you're convinced you have to stop. And then it was described to me as a period of grieving. All of a sudden, all these feelings that I was keeping at bay for years and years and years, my whole life came up and out. And it was described to me that grieving is a physical process. It takes about 9 to 12 months. So you have to like be willing to live through that year, at least that year, and not go back to the thing that numbed it and sort of hit the reset button on starting over again, because that's the way it kind of goes. Or if it's a toxic relationship you're in, not go back into that, or whatever your drug of choice is or was.
Did you feel like you were grieving the loss of the self you were that could use that as this way of dealing and regulating? Or what exactly were you grieving the loss of?
A lot of different things. Some of it was trauma. Some of it was just bad experiences I had as a kid and a teenager or adult. My deepest bottom was really my divorce. It was my AA bottom, alcoholism bottom, was no picnic at all. I don't mean to downplay it. I had a more profound emotional, collapse is the right word, but real terrible time when my marriage ended. And that I was grieving the loss of that relationship, but I really was grieving the loss of my father that I had never dealt with. And he hadn't passed away. We just were disconnected. And I experienced that at such a young age and couldn't. It was buried so deep that it didn't come up and out until I stopped numbing myself. And just realizing it was progress, but it didn't make it any less painful for a year.
And when you were in AA and you had a sponsor, we talked backstage a bit about that might not have been effective if you weren't talking to people who had gone through this themselves. Can you say a bit about that?
Definitely would not. I don't know what it is about. It's somebody just understanding, being empathetic, not just going, oh, I'm so sorry that, or, oh, well, cheer up, or whatever version of that you get from folks, which is well intended, but sort of makes you feel lonelier. But that happened to me. Yeah, I know what that feels like. And it's like, it's going to suck for a while, but I'm here for you. I can folks received it from me. I made it through. That was mostly it. I'd sit there in those rooms really freaking out and miserable. And you hear stories that are worse than yours. Worse. Like, oh, shit. But this guy's like smiling and okay. I'm like, how did you do that? And I would act, and like this way, we just would tell each other what it was like and sit there with each other.
From like the scientific perspective that we often have in the lab, when you think about ways in which other people's thoughts and their feelings get communicated to you in a way that makes you feel like your burdens are lifted, part of it is examples, role models of people who have gone through the struggles you've been through and survived and come out the other side. And that can offer you that kind of perspective that you can sit with and tolerate the pain that you're going through. Like, part of that depends on whether you think your experience is similar to theirs or not.
That's how you find a sponsor in those rooms. You wait to hear something that sounds like your story. You go up to that person and say, will you sponsor me through this? And all sponsor means is, you read through the steps together and you just share about how that's hitting you, and you just talk about your life based on how can I maybe bear some of this stuff if I'm not, dousing myself with drugs or alcohol or whatever else.
Kevin, how would you navigate studying people who are in an anonymous recovery program? I'm just curious, and this is kind of it's an evolving thing about, because one of the traditions of AA was that, anonymity was sacred, but I'm curious because now that we're studying these things, how would you go about that, like in official capacity representing Columbia University?
Just from a pragmatic perspective, we don't need to get into the nuts and bolts weeds of that kind of thing, but you'd have to be in contact with people who are in one of these groups. And anonymity doesn't, when you're doing science, it doesn't mean you never meet them or know their name. It just means the way that you record their data never includes their name along with what you learn about them and their experience. Any measure you take of their emotions, their feelings, their thoughts, you might have them report on their phone, give them little reminders of remember if you have a craving for alcohol today, this is what we want you to do. Scientists like me, we collaborate with some folks at Columbia Medical School that study alcohol dependence, where you do studies that give them little smartphone pushes, reminders of things that they need to do in their daily life. And then you try to measure what their outcomes are, what their trajectories are. You can tie those reminders to geographic locations, right? So if someone is near a bar or a liquor store, those locations are in the app on their phone, and it gives them reminders or even alerts a sponsor and says, hey, this person's near this place. They're near Moe's. Uh-oh, don't go in.
I hope they don't actually do that.
Hank, I'm curious because I've revealed on a number of these episodes that I'm in recovery and sober, and one of the traditions is to maintain anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. How do you navigate that as a public figure?
Something I've given a lot of thought to because it was years of recovery before, and I was asked a lot to do things like this or even just speak publicly in a non-recorded way, and I would say no because of that tradition. There are good reasons for it, that tradition. The main reason, as it was always explained to me, was that a lot of folks would get sober in AA. There's lots of ways to get sober, by the way, not just AA. But and then they would go public out of gratefulness and well-intentioned. Oh, I got sober in AA, I'm so grateful. And then 2 weeks later be publicly, wasted. And that great advertisement for AA and sobriety there. And that was sort of the main reason. And a lot of it's built too around there should be no leadership. There should be no, it's a group of fellows. Everyone's equal. There should be no public face of it or spokesperson for it. That's very, very important. Eventually, though, I felt, especially in the modern era we live in, social media and instant information, I personally felt that the benefits of speaking publicly about there's no shame in having this problem and seeking help and connecting with people over it outweighs any of those potential downsides. I went through, had a public controversy I was in the middle of over the character of Apu on The Simpsons. And as I was asked more and more to speak about it publicly and why I made the decision to stop doing The Voice, I couldn't leave out of it my recovery journey because it had a lot to do with it. A person who, as someone who, part of recovery is you look at your own part in things and take accountability and try to make amends. Which is how I felt about this is a whole nother night and different podcast and topic. I mean, open a can of worms, but suffice to say that there was no way to speak about that journey of empathy and where that led without referring to my own journey of recovery. So I did.
Thank you. The thing that you told me, Kevin, that I found very fascinating is the concept that you studied that you have studied acceptance, because acceptance, as Hank and I can attest, is probably the most central principle in recovery. Arguably, maybe there are others, but this is, I'd say, the Serenity Prayer is part of the zeitgeist now, but the key piece is, I can't remember it.
You're forgetting the Serenity Prayer?
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
The courage to change the things I can't.
Accept the things I cannot change. So,
Thank you.
so what I found fascinating, and I may be getting this wrong, but you said that acceptance happens somewhere else in the brain than a lot of the other executive function. Is that right?
Yeah, basically. So this slide and the one after it refer to a study we did a few years ago. We just take, and the idea of acceptance for us wasn't coming directly from the AA context. It was coming from kind of Buddhist psychology and Buddhist traditions. And the former grads.
Which I think is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah. There's a lot of wisdom that's been around for thousands of years. But the basic idea of acceptance is something bad might happen that makes you upset. And the Buddhists talked about that as the first arrow that causes an initial injury. But then there's a second arrow, which is a wound that you cause yourself, where you might be sad about something, but now you're angry because you're sad, and then you're afraid of what the anger will do because you're sad, and you've made an emotional mountain out of what was a little molehill. And the idea of acceptance, and there are whole kinds of therapy built around this. So we drew some of our way of doing this from something called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is really one of the most effective tools for people who have a chronic condition. It could be chronic pain, it could be something that doesn't ever go away, like you're always in recovery, right? Where you just learn to accept and allow the fact that there are aspects of yourself and feelings, cravings, in this case, it's experiences of pain or disgust that you might have, but you allow them. You bend like a reed in the wind. It's bad weather that goes past you, but it doesn't define you. And you can observe it, be distant from it, and accept that it exists.
I have a personal story that relates to that. As I was, getting over my marriage, I was told 9 to 12 months of grieving, and I was starting to feel better. And it was probably about 10 months into that, I was feeling pretty good. It'd been many days since I had felt bad or thought about that relationship. And I woke up one morning in misery. I don't know what it was. I just was missing my ex-wife and just feeling really bad, really, really bad. And it freaked me out. I thought I should have been past that point at that point. And I called my sponsor and said, Roger, I don't understand. What is this? Why am I back here? And I remember him saying, it's bad enough what you're feeling. Why are you attacking yourself for feeling it? He just said, feel it. It's a storm that'll pass. And it's just because it feels bad, that's all it is. It's just, that's plenty for today. Just feel it. And sure enough, by around the middle of the afternoon, I was like, oh, yeah, whereas I was really about to spin out. I never forgot that, and I've passed it on to many other sponsees since.
That's a great example of this. In the brain imaging context, what we found was when you train people just briefly to do this, people can grasp the idea of it pretty quickly. And then you show them either really nasty images, kinds of things you want to avert your eyes. And there's a brain structure called the amygdala. It just means almond in Greek. That image is as if you took a little slice, drop off the front of my head, and they're kind of looking in. It's right about here. You're kind of looking in through the front. That brain structure turns out to be really important for detecting things that are potential threats out in the world and signaling pay attention, what is that, be alert. And that brain system we know will respond when you see these kind of nasty images. But when you're accepting and allowing the fact that they're there, you can see the response, it's diminished. And then in another part of the experiment, we put this really hot thing on your forearm that feels like that hot cup of coffee, spill your Starbucks on your arm. And when people are just I'm going to accept and allow the fact this is pain, it will come and it will go. and I'll be fine. You can see the response, and that's a brain structure. Don't have to worry about what the brain structures are. There's a whole, like, they call it the pain matrix, a whole set of brain regions when you're in physical pain, they're active. Activity there goes down a lot. But the striking thing was, in contrast to other ways of regulating your emotion, like in cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, all these kind of very Western means of training people to logically reanalyze something. You know, you're having this feeling, logically analyze whether there's really a basis for you to feel that. Like, you're overinterpreting this. It's like the wrong interpretation. That stuff involves all this frontal activity up here turning off parts of your brain that trigger emotion. But for this, there's nothing here. There's no frontal lobe involvement at all. And believe me, we looked for it. We sat on these results for a while thinking we did something wrong. Like, it's gotta be there. Control, by definition, is this stuff modulating something else. It's like the conductor of the orchestra telling the emotional instruments, stop playing so loud. But we didn't see it. And Hedy Kober, the first author of this paper, who herself is a Buddhist, always said, like, that's what Buddha would say. It's like, yeah, you're just not, it's not the second arrow. It's like, okay, things feel bad, but maybe what we see in a lot of our brain imaging studies of emotional response is the amplification on top of a response that otherwise would have been smaller.
We have another saying in programming, you got to feel it to heal it. And I think we talked about this backstage. You want to find out why you stopped drinking. Sure, a lot of pain came up, but it wasn't the pain itself that made me want to drink. It was the belief that I had, the core belief that this pain was never going to end. So there was really no point so feeling it was not a good idea. I had to avoid feeling it in whatever way I could, as opposed to, I didn't have belief that it would pass, you know. And I think almost every newcomer to the rooms has that belief.
Yeah, you're not alone in that, you know, certainly in that context. But I think one of the weird things about feeling terrified or any strong negative emotion, feeling really ashamed or embarrassed about something, is there's this weird thing negative emotions do to us that they make us feel like that feeling will never go away. It's here, it's not going to go away, and there's nothing you can do about it. It can be very disempowering. And like scientists who try to understand where emotions come from, distinguish your initial interpretation of what's happening that triggers that response, like the fear, the anxiety, and then a second interpretation, which is, can I cope with it? And it's that coping thing. If the answer there is, I can't do it on my own, it can create all these other things. You seek some other solution. And so psychologists will call it a maladaptive strategy. Alcohol, any substance use, all kinds of addictions take root when there isn't something else available. And a lot, like what people are doing when you see a therapist, or like when we were talking backstage, one tool when you aren't able to do it yourself is just be with other people who can help you do it until you can get there yourself. And frankly, like, I remember being a parent when our kids were really little. It's a little dangerous because they're sitting in the front row listening to everything I say very closely. You had this sense, like, kids come into the world not having a fully developed frontal lobe or sense of, they don't know yet, can they trust that things, when they're upset, it's going to get better. And like, one of the big jobs as a parent is when they're upset to be there for them. So they learn things get better, but they're also learning tacitly they get better with other people present who care about you. Right? And that's so important. There's a whole theory called attachment theory that's all about that. It's all about learning early on that there's this, they call it the secure base. It's like people that have this close relationship, just them being there makes me feel better, because it's like, it's a safety signal. It's like, hey, they're here, it can't be so bad.
Most of that first year, all my recoveries were about somebody just sitting with me, and that's why we say one day at a time, because the idea of like I'll never drink again, or I'm going to endure this pain for longer than today is just so kind of horrifying and panic-inducing that we just kind of convince each other, you just have to get through today. Just don't drink today. Just feel this today. And I'd say most of what I do with sponsees is just convince them it's not going to be tomorrow that this feels better, but it will if you stay with it eventually. And I'm a living example, and my sponsor was a living example to me. And it's just, convincing folks to stay with it long enough before you turn to the maladaptive choice, which I understand wanting to turn to. You really believe that there's just no way out.
So we are at the point where we open it up to the audience for questions, and many have been submitted. You just mentioned, Kevin, the amygdala, and you mentioned anxiety, right? That's where that happens. Someone wants to know, what is Moe Sizlak's take on anxiety?
I'm glad we're starting off with a heady question here. Look, I aspire to anxiety. Right? I live in like the depths of horror. Like, well, you know when you're like the worst scare you ever had, jump scare in a horror movie?
Sure.
Yeah, I live there all the time. So I aspire to just like a nice baseline of anxiety. That would be like heaven for me.
Okay, that's fair.
Wait, can I add something to that?
Please.
There's no way to top that. But you're just reminding me, I had an advisor in grad school who said, happiness is the absence of anxiety.
One more time.
Happiness is the absence of anxiety. I always thought that was a pretty sad life that he led, but there's something to that. There is something to that.
We call it the priceless gift of serenity in recovery. I kind of think of it that way. And also, there was like 6 months into my alcohol recovery where it just was wildly boring. You know, I didn't really feel like drinking anymore, but I'm like, this is just, I got very nihilistic. Got like, what's the point of any of this? I'm really boring now. I'm bored with everyone and everything. And like, why even do this? And I got close to, I really got thought about going back to drinking, not to relieve misery, but just like, I got to mix this up. This is just, and then I shared it with my spouse, like, I don't know, this seems pointless to me. And it just feels nothing. And I started thinking about all the damage that I would be doing if I were still drinking. All the negative. I started thinking in terms of all the horrible shit I wasn't doing, and not the great stuff I could be doing. And I started realizing, oh my, I'll take the boring.
That's actually exactly what we had people do in our first study of trying to get people to regulate craving. It was think about all the negative stuff that will happen if you do it. But for that was like smokers, and then people have subsequently done it with alcohol and so on. It's a powerful block.
And I'd gone far enough in my alcoholism to really come very close to a lot of those bad things. You know, yeah, I was fortunate I didn't go any farther.
Well, someone wants to know, your recovery story puts Brockmire in a whole new light for me. Was that hard to do?
Is there a question in there for Jim Brockmire, or what's the story? Jim Brockmire is a baseball announcer character I played who had a nervous breakdown on the air, drank a lot, drugged a lot, much too much, walked in on his wife having an affair, got blackout drunk on the air, and said things like, but kept giving the count in the baseball game. Said like, sorry, folks, just walked in on my wife. With, I don't know if your kids know this, but it's called a strap-on. And she was ramming my neighbor, Bob Greenwald, and I do mean right in the ass as Johnson swings and misses at a breaking ball 0-1. That's Jim Brockmire. What, is there a question for Brockmire now?
I think the question is for Hank Azaria. Was that hard to do?
No, well, I played an alcoholic, drug addict in that, and was always drinking and drugging on the show, and I really loved it. It was really fun to like revisit. It was like watching a horror movie.
Was it cathartic? Or?
Yes, it was like the fun of watching it play out. But thank God I'm not really getting my head chopped off by Freddy Krueger. And some of it I realized, like sitting there and I got just I was drinking iced tea, but as whiskey, and I kind of got kind of drunk just from the ritual, like the muscle memory of sitting at a bar and knocking them back, and it was kind of fun. Yeah,
Don't they call that a free lapse?
I guess. Yeah. When you have
Is
that
that a
relapse
term?
dream and you wake up and you're like, huh, and like, oh wow, I just got drunk for free without any real consequences.
Yeah. What are you going to say, Kevin?
I was just going to say the brain learns to associate all the physical stuff that you did with the feeling of having the alcohol. So if you do something that just resembles it, it's going to cue that stuff up. It's like when you drink a diet beverage and you still have a spike of insulin. Like, they're not good for diabetics to have because your brain has come to associate the sweet taste with the sugar in your system. And in anticipation of the sugar being in your bloodstream, you drink the sweet drink, the insulin gets released.
I mean, that's kind of a key to acting. Well, yeah, I did it. I won't go into the long story, but I started smiling a lot more because I sort of needed to, because I was very grumpy about a certain thing, and I decided just to smile. And that came out of program, kind of working with my sponsor. And, I realized my body doesn't know the difference between a fake smile and a real one. I started actually experiencing more happiness and joy after a while. And conversely, like, I did a Holocaust drama about 25 years ago. And about a week in, and I'm not a method actor. I go very outside and I do voices and sort of character things, and I don't really like try to relive stuff like some people do. But lo and behold, after a week of shooting this, I was getting very depressed. I was like, what's wrong with me? I was like, well, I'm sort of reenacting the Holocaust every day. That's, not a pick-me-up. And so I started having to watch comedies at the end of every day to kind of like cleanse my emotional palate, and it worked. But yeah, so pretending to drink was fun.
Okay. By the way, there's some evidence that if you give people Botox injections, their emotions get a little weaker.
Oh, from not having any expression?
Yeah, for not being able to have the facial expression. There's this old idea from William James, a psychologist, called the facial feedback hypothesis, that part of the emotional response is reading out kind of how your body's responding, which happens before you become conscious of even what you're feeling. And it turns out you have people pose facial expressions. They'll start to feel the emotion that goes along with it. But then by extension, if you give them Botox injections, we actually did a study like this, their emotions get just a little bit weaker. Not a ton, but just a little bit weaker.
Did you administer the Botox too?
Sorry?
Did you administer the Botox?
No. We recruited people from a clinic. Okay. Oh my God, there's a whole backstory to this. Martin Short, I think he used to do a character that was a Botox doctor on SNL. It was the actual guy, the guy in real life that he was imitating.
Yeah.
We went to his clinic. We got his patients.
Oh, wow.
There's a sad story there if you Google it, but we don't.
It's not Zizmore, is it?
Pardon?
Zizmore, the guy that's on the Subway ads? Dr. Zizmore.
You don't mean Mo Sizlak, do you?
No, wait, someone wants to know what's the origin of Mo Sizlak's last name. Are you hip? Do you know?
It's Polish, and I think like most of the names on The Simpsons, it's some writer's childhood friend.
Yeah.
Usually that's the last name.
Okay. Someone wanted to know, as society moves more online, do you believe the human species is forgetting the basic things that makes us human, empathy and social interaction with others?
I think that was for you.
So I'm not a Luddite. I'm not anti-technology at all. And I don't think it is. I think the very ubiquity and popularity of social media is a testament to how social we are as a species. It's just another forum, another mode of expression. It does have, it's like lower dimensional, like text. You don't get the nonverbals, the tone of voice and all that stuff. And that, I think in the long run, might be a problem. Like you need to learn in direct interaction with other people how to interpret what's going on and how to have conversations and have close relationships with people. And that can't be done just on text.
But I think we're correcting for that with the exclamation points, the over.
And the emojis for sure speak volumes.
Okay, introvert extrovert development. How does this occur in the brain? Do you have an answer for that?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Oddly comic book guy does.
Okay. Fill us in.
No, I really don't. That's very interesting, though.
It is. I don't mean to be flip about that, but I think personality is something that's complex enough that it wouldn't just boil down to like a brain system or something like that. Mm-hmm. It would be about like a complex set of things you've learned over time. It turns out there's probably some genetic predisposition to be more of an introvert or an extrovert. But these effects kind of appear pretty early. Like there's developmental psychologists who look for kids that sort of temperamentally look a little more inhibited. They look for like physical characteristics and genetic markers for these kind of things. There is some evidence that there's an early appearing component that kind of snowballs over time.
Are kids better at mindful acceptance than adults because they don't have a fully developed frontal lobe that creates the second arrow?
That's a good.
Didn't you kind of just say that
that's
they
a good
do?
Question.
Didn't you just?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't know. Kids, their frontal lobe is developing. Like your frontal lobe is continuing to develop structurally all the way up into your early 30s. And certainly through your 20s. The funny thing about acceptance is it involves a kind of meta-awareness of yourself. And we've done other stuff with it, actually, with college students that's coupled with like reminders and measures of their alcohol consumption in daily life, with Emily Falk and a bunch of other people at the University of Pennsylvania, where it's not, the frontal, it's not the same as the other things. In that sense, being frontal, it's not like effortfully trying to rethink and rejigger a response. But there is some kind of meta ability that I don't think kids might have yet. But I don't know. That's a really interesting question. We should study that.
Okay. We got time for one more.
I bet it might depend if there's someone there to help them model the acceptance. There's actually this really interesting phenomenon called like maternal presence, that for a lot of mammalian species, if mom is there, it's kind of a signal, and mom is not looking afraid, it's a signal that things are okay. And they'll like explore environments that they would otherwise be fearful in. And in fact, there's like this phenomenon, this tool, like this method called fear conditioning, where you learn to associate like a bad outcome with like a light or a tone. Like it's classic, B.F. Skinner, if you know who that is. It turns out in like rats and even in people, you kind of can't fear condition when mom is there. Like
They haven't met my mom. Be careful with that thing. You're going to break your neck.
Okay.
I had a T-shirt made that said that. No, really. I mean, we talked about that backstage. One of the things that my wife and I learned early on, the good advice we got as parents was, the little one falls and falls down in the playground. They immediately look at you, as you said. They look to mom or dad, and you don't want to go, oh my God, and you also don't want to go, you're fine, because let's see how they are. We were advised to say, I saw that you fell. How's that going? And it was amazing to watch, because sometimes it was actually genuinely hurt, so you don't want to say, no, you're fine, walk it off. And sometimes he was actually fine. And I think I do want to say one thing about acceptance from a program standpoint, because this blew my mind in early recovery. My sponsor just said to me really simply, because I was really having a hard time with it, like, isn't that acceptance? I mean, that means I'm supposed to like condone all the awful shit going on personally and in the world. He's like, no, accepting doesn't mean liking at all. It just means you are in acceptance of what is, and including your own feelings about it. That's all that means. That really blew my mind. Yeah.
Okay, we got time for one more question. What Simpsons characters are Hank's favorites, both the ones that he plays as well as the others?
Moe is the closest to my heart.
There's other characters I really love. I really love Kent Brockman. I love the newscaster. Harry Shearer to me is a genius, and the way he can, watching Harry do that. Harry never. We all don't have to memorize lines because it's voiceover, so we just read it. But Harry, it's often cold read, like it's the first time he's laying eyes on it, and it just comes out of him perfectly on the first take, and like next. And how he can get that newscaster rhythm just so naturally, I just find it endlessly amusing. I also love, I love Martin. Not Martin. Excuse me. I love Ralph.
Please see Wiggum's son, Ralph.
Oh, yeah.
Ralph is the hardest character to write, the writers say, because he's so stupid that everything he has to say has to be really brief and really comically stupid. So it's like writing poetry almost. It's like writing comedic haiku. It's really hard to write Ralph. I love
I
Ralph.
saw an Instagram post you put up resurrecting Chief Wiggum, especially, and I thought about this when I was watching the debate because there was.
You mean when he took the call about people eating cats and dogs in Springfield?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. That went viral, as the kids like to say.
I know. How did that first come on your radar that had happened?
I have a social media person, as we do in Hollywood, and they said, "Look at this Jon Stewart clip. He was talking about that Trump talking about that Haitian folks eating cats and dogs in Springfield, I believe Ohio. By the way, it's Springfield in The Simpsons because Matt Groening called it that Springfield because there's a Springfield in every state in the union. That's why he did that. So they said he referenced Springfield. Can you think of something? I'm sure you can think of something that ties in The Simpsons. So
It seemed natural to have Police Chief Wiggum receiving a call about people eating cats and dogs. And at the end of it, he asked, are they good? Because he likes to eat.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Hank Azaria and Dr. Kevin Ochsner. You can catch Hank on Broadway this February in the star-studded comedy All In. For tickets, please visit allinbroadway.com. Also, be sure to check out Hank's Bruce Springsteen tribute band on tour. For dates, please visit easystreetnyc.com. For more information about Kevin's work, you can check out his lab's website, ochsnerscanlab.org. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Guest accommodations for this event were generously provided by Ace Hotel Brooklyn. Our music is by Panoram. Social media manager is Bailey Constas. Digital producer is Keenan Cush. And our location recording engineers were Brian Enright and Justin Anderson. Special thanks to Jane Pollock, Yadira Martinez, Paula Croxon, Kim Millian, Catherine Nemitz, Alyssa Mayers, Laura Splan, Mayoa Tamori, and Monica Rocha for making today's episode possible. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review, tell a friend about the show, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, please visit singforscience.org and follow us on social media at Sing for Science. Thanks for listening.